Even if there was a dilution of the fields of forces and matter energy, this would not mean that there was an increase in the extension of space. As the fields and matter are agitations, relative movements, a greater or lesser measured intensity of these movements would neither enlarge nor reduce the size of space. When you shake a glass of water, more or less it never serves to change the size of the glass of water. When light hits us, we see it. When sound hits us, we are able to hear it. When we touch any material object, we feel it with our touch. Light, sound, matter are nothing more than movements in relation to the observer. Matter and energy have the same nature as space, as the void. In fact, both matter and energy are products of empty space. The difference is that the space we define as empty presents us with much less movement, almost no observable movement in relation to ourselves. We see, hear and feel with the tactile touch because we too are nothing more physically than movements in relation to light, sound, and other material objects. We interact with them, we resist the movements that they are because we are no different from them in our nature. According to quantum theory, every material body is a wave. The waves of light, of sound, and the waves associated with all the different material bodies cannot remain indifferent to the interferences that happen when they meet us, since we have the same nature as them. Being physically just a relative amount of movement in space, we also propagate through space. We are waves that propagate, that move. This is what makes the mass have inertia. This is what makes us inertia. We are the types of movement that we present. We are the states of motion in which we find ourselves. We do not have a different nature than the movements we experience. Our movement situation is our only local physical constituent, and we resist any other kind of movement that we come in contact with because our nature is also movement. When we propagate through space in rectilinear and uniform motion in the absence of other motions relative to us in space, in a vacuum, far from any other matter, our relative motion always maintains itself because is this movement. It's our only constituent, it's our structure, the kind of movement we present. It is also correct to assume in the situation of rectilinear and uniform motion that we are in a perfect state of rest because empty space does not serve as a reference for any type of movement, since there are no absolute references in empty space for any type of movement. Although we move through empty space in rectilinear and uniform motion, this situation is always also a perfect physical state of rest because there is nothing in empty space that can serve as a reference to determine our state of motion in relation to empty space. Also because the movement that constitutes us is a movement in space, in the void, which because it is continuous and extensive, being an instantaneously perfectly connected whole, infinite in extent, is keyed up, and this voltage fluctuates. Because we are a movement through the void founded on the void, every movement we experience is always also a perfect state of the most complete rest, or so it can be considered. If space were able to spontaneously increase in size, what would we perceive? Would we be dragged through the expanding empty space if it continuously passed us more quickly? In this situation, if it were possible, and it is not because the metric of empty space is already infinite, we would feel a change in the tension of empty space, we would therefore feel a force acting on us pushing or pulling us somewhere. However, we would also continue to be in this situation in a perfect situation of rest in relation to empty space. It makes no sense to claim that empty space passes faster or slower than anything else. Indeed, it is impossible for any body to move with respect to empty space, since empty space is continuous, without divisions or absolute delimitations, and there is nothing in empty space that can serve to determine or mark this movement. An expansion of empty space, if it occurred, could be measured as a change in the tension of the force fields. Such tension can be found and measured if it occurs. Force fields are indeed capable of dragging and pushing galaxies because they present movements that can change the situation of inertial movement of these galaxies. For a more precise definition, or we have the empty space at rest with respect to the observer, or we have a field of forces which is a type of motion.